Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are unpacking some truly mind bending source material. We're diving deep into the spiritual revelations of Edgar Cayce, one of the most famous figures of the 20th century. This explainer is going to take us on a really fascinating journey into the true history of the human soul. Basically, we're exploring how these curated texts attempt to answer some of life's biggest, most persistent mysteries. Things like human suffering, life's inequalities, and what actually happens behind the veil of our everyday consciousness. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever looked around the world and just wondered, why do terrible, unexplainable misfortunes strike seemingly good people? I mean, why do some folks face sudden illness or intense hardship despite doing absolutely nothing to deserve it, while others just seem to, sail through life completely effortlessly? It's a universal, deeply human question. And it's exactly the mystery that the source text we're analyzing today tries to solve, all through the extraordinary life and work of Edgar Cayce. To understand the answer, we first have to understand the man. So let's move to section 1, the sleeping prophet's miracles. The text frames Cayce as one of the greatest psychics of 20th century America. Honestly, his abilities were so profound that he's often compared to Nostradamus. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer volume and depth of Cayce's spiritual readings. We're going to unpack the contents of this specific source text to understand how a regular guy, living in America roughly a century ago, managed to leave behind a legacy of literally thousands of documented miracles and philosophical insights that people are still studying today. Now, the absolute cornerstone of Cayce's work is something called a reading. The text explains that while Cayce was awake, he had, absolutely no special medical or historical knowledge. He was just an ordinary man. But once he lay down and entered a self-induced hypnotic trance, something incredible happened. His conscious mind basically stepped aside, and a massive wealth of philosophical, medical, and historical information just flowed right out of him, completely bypassing his waking consciousness. According to our source material, these trances produced 3 main pillars of miracles. First up, he provided highly specific medical treatments for seemingly incurable illnesses. And the crazy part? When patients followed his advice, they were healed. Second, he made future predictions, looking ahead at the destinies of individuals, nations, the whole shebang. But the third pillar, that's what the text focuses on the most: past life readings. This is where Cayce didn't just look forward, he looked backward. He uncovered the vast, hidden history of the human soul to help people solve their very real, present-day problems. So how exactly did he pull this off? Let's unlock the mechanics in section 2, unlocking the soul's subconscious. The text actually gives us a fascinating mechanical explanation for how Cayce accessed all this hidden information while literally just unconscious on a couch. The source uses this brilliant, modern metaphor. It states that the mind contains a literal tape recorder, and on this internal tape, absolutely everything you have ever thought and everything you've ever done is permanently stored. And the text is super clear about this. This recording doesn't just start the day you are born in this lifetime. No, this tape has been running continuously across a vast history of past lives. The text explains it kind of like this. Our normal waking consciousness is like looking through binoculars with foggy lenses, or maybe wearing swimming goggles filled with water. You just can't see clearly. But hypnosis allowed Cayce to wipe the fog right off the glass. By putting his physical body to sleep, he allowed high-level spiritual guides to take over. These spirits could then look clearly at a patient's internal tape recorder, hit rewind, and read their soul's history to figure out exactly why they were suffering in the present day. And this ability to read those subconscious tapes leads us straight into section 3, the law of reincarnation. This idea of the continuous rebirth of the human soul is really the core philosophical concept that emerged from all of Cayce's work. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound social question the text poses. Think about the extremes of human existence, like the ancient caste systems, right? How can we explain why one person is born into vast wealth and royalty, while another is born into the most severe poverty? I mean, these circumstances require absolutely zero effort from the infant being born. If we only live once, how is that fair or even logical? Our source material contrasts these two worldviews impartially. If you look at existence through the lens of just a single lifetime, then hardships, illness, and your social standing at birth appear totally random, highly unfair, and frankly, unexplainable. But through the law of reincarnation, as revealed in Cayce's readings, a totally different logic appears. Current circumstances aren't random at all. They are the direct, inevitable consequences of actions taken by that exact soul across a vast, multi-century history of past lives. Which brings us to the mechanics of how this rebirth actually functions in Section 4, Karma, Seeds of the Past. How do the actions of a past life physically manifest today? So the crucial point is captured in this really simple proverb from the text. You must reap the seeds you have sown. The readings revealed that when folks came to Cayce with severe, unexplainable physical disabilities or catastrophic life failures, it was rarely a coincidence. The current misfortune was simply the harvesting of a karmic seed they had planted themselves, sometimes centuries ago, in a completely different body. Interestingly, the text notes that discovering this karmic law gave tremendous comfort to people. Really? Instead of feeling cursed by some random chaotic universe, they realized their unexplainable hardships were actually a form of atonement, like a balancing of the scales for a karmic debt. It totally reframed their suffering from meaningless torture into a necessary spiritual lesson for the soul's ultimate growth. And this completely changes how we view human health. The source text uses a beautiful analogy here. It says we should view human existence like riding a boat down a large river. Sometimes the water is smooth, but other times your boat gets caught in a whirlpool or runs aground in the shallows. The absolute key takeaway from Cayce's readings is that the soul itself never actually becomes sick. Your physical body, it's merely the temporary boat. And illness is just a mechanical malfunction of this temporary vessel as it navigates the river of eternity. This profound shift in perspective leads to the final, grand historical purpose behind Cayce's work. Let's look at Section 5, Supplementing Christian Doctrine. Now, here's an incredibly ironic and highlighted point in the text. Edgar Cayce himself was actually a very strict, devout Christian. While awake, he didn't believe in reincarnation at all. Actually, scratch that. He was initially shocked and deeply troubled when he woke up from his trances to find that his own mouth had been preaching the continuous rebirth of the soul and the law of karma. Let's move to and see how this builds into a much larger religious context. The source text neutrally outlines a perceived gap here. It notes that while traditional Christianity offers beautiful teachings, it lacks explicit, developed doctrines regarding reincarnation and the mechanics of karma over multiple lifetimes. So Cayce's overarching mission, directed by his guiding spirits, wasn't to destroy his faith, but to supplement it. He was chosen to integrate this missing true history of the soul into the Western religious consciousness. Ultimately, the text argues that Cayce's role was absolutely staggering in scope to initiate a modern religious reformation. Look, we live in a highly skeptical scientific age, right? We demand proof. By providing immense amounts of objective, verifiable data through his super accurate medical diagnoses and specific historical details, Cayce aimed to definitively prove the reality of the spiritual world to modern society. He was literally building an undeniable data set to show that the soul is real and it is eternal. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. I want to leave you with a rather profound question based on this text. If the law of karma is real, and if your soul's history truly spans centuries, what is currently being recorded on your internal tape recorder right now? What seeds are you planting today that you might just have to harvest in a future lifetime? It's a fascinating concept from the source material that genuinely makes you reevaluate your everyday actions. Thank you so much for joining me on the explainer today, and keep exploring.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to jump right into a pretty radical concept from our source text. We're exploring the profound and honestly fascinating connection between your mind and your physical health. Based on insights derived from the spiritual readings of Edgar Cayce, we are looking specifically at the principles of healing. And trust me, this isn't just your standard eat an apple a day advice. We are talking about a fundamental paradigm shift in how we view the human body and why it breaks down.
So let's kick things off with a slightly provocative question. What if your thoughts, literally the thoughts bouncing around in your head right now, are actually what's making you sick? In our hyper-managed modern world, we're so quick to blame a virus or genetics or just plain bad luck when we get ill. But the material we're looking at today argues that we might be looking at the entirely wrong end of the equation.
Get this. The text reveals a massive paradigm shift. It claims that a staggering 70% of diseases are actually rooted in mental and emotional states. Yeah, 70%. The physical or material factors, the stuff we usually rush to fix with a bandage or a pill, those only account for about 30% of the root cause. Basically, the vast majority of our physical suffering is actually starting in the invisible, internal landscape of our minds.
Because of that 70-30 splits, we really have to redefine what illness even is. It's not just some mechanical malfunction of the body. It's a fundamental breakdown in our holistic, spiritual balance. When the harmony in our mind collapses, the body literally manifests that collapse physically. It's kind of like a giant alarm system, waving a huge red flag in the form of symptoms, just to tell us that our inner emotional world is in serious distress.
And what's wild is that the source applies this rule even to everyday ailments. It argues that a tired mind creates a vulnerable body. You might think catching a cold is just because you were stuck in an elevator with someone who sneezed, but the text argues that the gateway for that illness was actually opened up by mental fatigue. A loosening of the mind or a drop in your spiritual guard is what actually lets that physical breakdown take hold.
Section 1. Diagnosing the modern world. Cancer and heart disease. Okay, so let's look at the fundamental difference between traditional medicine and this holistic view. Traditional medicine usually looks at a symptom, like a mutated cell or a clogged artery, and tries to mechanically fix it, right? But the holistic spiritual view we're analyzing goes deeper. It looks at that exact same mutated cell and asks, what inner emotional turmoil generated the destructive energy that actually caused this physical mutation in the first place? Let's take cancer, for example. The source text explicitly defines it as far more than just a random cellular mutation. It describes it as a physical reflection of our highly stressful, modern managed society. It's a very modern illness. The text suggests that the intense, high-pressure environment we live in creates a specific kind of mental cloudiness. It's this dark, heavy thought pattern that then reflects directly into our physical tissues. So what does that actually look like? Well, cancer is linked to very specific, heavy emotional burdens. The text notes that patients often harbor deep inner conflicts and deeply suppressed feelings. But the real kicker? The most destructive element is the self-punishing thought. Living in a society that constantly makes you feel inadequate creates this chronic state of self-denial. It's that constant internal whisper saying, "I am no good," which then literally materializes as destructive cells. And when we examine the original Japanese text, we can clearly see the diagnosis of how these self-denying emotions actively generate illness within the body. The source specifically points out that the energy of self-condemnation and feeling inadequate, which, let's be real, are reinforced daily by societal pressures, those are the literal seeds from which aberrant cells grow. It's a stark reminder that our thoughts have actual biological mass. Now, if cancer is tied to self-punishment, let's pivot to heart disease. The source connects heart disease directly to our endless, totally exhausting competition with the clock. If cancer is the disease of self-punishment, heart disease is the disease of panic. The heart represents the very center of our physical vitality. So when our core philosophy of life is totally disrupted by the frantic pace of modern living, the heart takes the direct hit. It's chronic anxiety and a deep-seated victim mindset that place this unbearable strain on the heart. Think about that constant rushing. The feeling that you're always falling behind, that severe anxiety of just racing against time. It puts immense pressure on your vitality. And when you add in a victim mentality, feeling constantly persecuted or just needlessly worrying all the time, it creates a psychological burden that the physical heart is forced to carry until it finally breaks down.
So we're seeing a really clear division here. The pathology of the body perfectly mirrors the pathology of the mind. If you're dealing with deep inner conflict and you're constantly punishing yourself, the text suggests this manifests as cancer. On the flip side, if you're living in a state of chronic stress, racing against time, and feeling victimized, well, that specific anxiety targets the heart.
Section 2. The holistic cure, healing mind and body. All right, here's where we get to the really empowering part. If our mental states have the power to make us sick, they absolutely hold the incredible power to heal us too. The fundamental cure isn't just about cutting out bad tissue, it's about cutting out the bad thoughts. The source insists that true healing really begins when we consciously release those dark, heavy, self-punishing thoughts and actively redirect our mental energy toward the light. To do this, the text outlines a really comprehensive 4-pillar prescription. It beautifully marries spiritual mindset shifts with tangible physical actions. Because, let's face it, you can't just think positive thoughts while eating terrible food, and you can't eat a perfect diet while hating yourself. It takes all 4 steps: releasing negative emotions, actively cultivating a cheerful outlook, making targeted dietary improvements, and engaging in moderate, consistent exercise.
And speaking of diet, this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Specific nutrients are prescribed here not just for the physical body, but specifically for the mind. Take calcium, for instance. It isn't just for strong bones. The text recommends it because it literally calms an overactive nervous system, helping physically enable mental release. Similarly, plant-based diets high in chlorophyll are prescribed to inhibit disease, while increasing iron and reducing salt helps restore overall harmony. The source explicitly validates how these plant-based foods and specific minerals chemically assist in our spiritual and emotional release. It clearly advises that to open and liberate the mind, you need to consume things that biologically facilitate that process. Taking in calcium pacifies nerve oversensitivity, while the deep green elements of plants actively fight the development of disease cells. It is just a brilliant synthesis of treating the body and the mind together.
So the big takeaway here is that true wellness demands you treat both the physical vessel and the spiritual mind simultaneously. You really cannot treat one and ignore the other. Both the 70% mental and the 30% physical have to be addressed. Healing is an active, holistic harmonization. It's forgiving yourself, letting go of time anxiety, and then supporting that new mental freedom with a calming diet and exercise that gets your energy moving.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a powerful question to think about for your own holistic journey. If 70% of your physical well-being is dictated by your emotional state, that means you have an incredible amount of control over your own health. So, look inward for a second. What heavy, self-punishing, or anxious thought are you carrying around right now? And more importantly, are you ready to finally let it go? Thanks so much for exploring this amazing paradigm shift with me today.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating, holistic approach to curing the deep, heavy fatigue of our modern era. If you've ever felt completely drained by the relentless pace of today's world, that feeling of just being utterly depleted, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to look at some unique insights derived from a collection of spiritual readings, and we're going to extract a highly practical guide to reclaiming your energy. All right, let's just dive right into it.
But before we get to the solutions, we really have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. Why do so many of us feel completely drained, despite living in times of unprecedented convenience? I mean, we don't have to go out and hunt for our food or build our own shelters from scratch, yet we are constantly burned out. What is actually going on here?
Well, the source text points out something pretty crucial. Look, cities are amazing, right? They are incredible hubs of culture and connection, but they're also engines of immense, totally unnatural psychological stress. We're living in this dense information age, just constantly bombarded by data, concrete, and the nonstop pressure of complex urban living. It's like a giant, overwhelming puzzle. Honestly, our brains and bodies were simply not built to process this much constant stimulation without a serious counterbalance. And that is exactly what we are going to unpack today. By examining Chapter 3 of these spiritual readings, which is brilliantly titled Health Methods for Modern People, we are going to uncover a highly practical, surprisingly direct map for managing this very specific type of modern burnout. It's not just some abstract theory, it's basically a survival manual for the modern city.
So here's our roadmap. We'll be looking at 3 core pillars. Number 1, physical vitality. 2, reconnecting with nature. And 3, cultivating a spring-like mind.
Let's jump straight into Pillar 1, physical vitality.
You see, the most immediate, glaring physical casualty of our information age lifestyle is a critical lack of physical movement. Modern urban living has almost entirely stripped natural movement out of our daily routines. We sit at our desks, we commute in cars or on trains, and then we go home and relax on the couch. The text argues that this creates a profound, actually dangerous imbalance. Think about it. Our minds are hyperactive and stressed to the max, but our bodies are completely sedentary. We are overflowing with nervous mental energy, but we're physically stagnant. So, how do we fix this imbalance? Well, the text offers a really specific, actionable solution. The magic number here is 3. We absolutely must commit to dedicating 1 full hour to intense physical exercise 3 times a week. Whether that's playing a sport, going for a vigorous walk, or heading to the gym, the whole key here is consistency. You need 3 hours out of your entire week to physically exhaust the body so it actually matches the exhaustion of your mind. And the return on that investment? It's massive. The source asserts that by securing just these 3 hours of exercise a week, the average person can extend their lifespan by at least 5 years. But it's not just about living a longer life. Those 5 years come with an extended capacity for continued intellectual and creative activity way later in life. It literally buys you more time to be brilliant.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, reconnecting with nature.
Now, this next pillar takes a highly surprising spiritual perspective on a very common modern ailment. Think about the sudden, widespread rise of hay fever and pollen allergies we've seen in recent decades. We usually just blame it on genetics or a particularly harsh spring season, right? But the text asks us to look a bit deeper. Could these allergies actually be a spiritual warning?
Yeah, the text makes the startling claim that these widespread allergies are actually a spiritual reaction. It describes them as a warning from nature spirits, specifically mentioning spirits that dwell in cedar trees and forests, directed right at humanity. The source explains that because modern humans are so deeply immersed in this artificial, concrete civilization, we've destroyed the environment and just completely forgotten our gratitude for the natural world. The physical irritation of the allergy, it's framed as a literal wake-up call from nature.
This perfectly illustrates the core philosophy of the text. There's this great quote, "When people lived in harmony with great nature, there was no such thing as hay fever." Now, whether you take this literally or metaphorically, the lesson is incredibly clear. To truly heal our modern bodies, we have to step outside the concrete jungle and intentionally rebuild a mindset of deep daily gratitude for the natural world around us. We really have to remember where we came from.
Which brings us to Pillar 3, a spring-like mind.
Our final pillar focuses entirely on how our internal thoughts directly sculpt our external health, and it uses this beautiful seasonal metaphor to explain human vitality. On one side, we have the winter mindset. This is a psychological state of feeling lonely, dwelling on the past, and basically preparing to wither. The source warns that this mindset rapidly accelerates physical aging. But on the flip side, we have the spring-like mindset. This is a vibrant, uplifting state of mind characterized by cheerfulness, hope, and the feeling that you are constantly blooming no matter what your chronological age says.
So how do you actually maintain this youthful heart? The source offers some incredibly specific practical advice here. First, it literally recommends dressing 5 to 10 years younger than your actual age. It's a way to radically shift your self-image and prevent your mind from aging in. Second, it encourages maintaining a real sense of romance and passion in your life, noting that this actually boosts your hormonal vitality. And finally, it urges us to never stop learning, pursue new hobbies, and continuously study spiritual truths to heal yourself from the inside out. Basically, whatever you do, don't let your curiosity retire.
So, bringing it all together, the crucial point we've learned from this explainer is this. Surviving and thriving in the information age isn't just about taking a magic pill or going on some quick fad diet. It's a balancing act. It requires us to actively balance our physical bodies through disciplined exercise, to deeply respect and show gratitude to our natural environment, and to stubbornly refuse to let our minds wither into that winter state. True health is the harmony of all three. I really want to leave you with this final thought today. Take a good, hard look at your own modern life, with all its screen time, stress, and crazy busy schedules. Ask yourself, which of these 3 pillars, physical action, natural gratitude, or a spring-like mindset, is most in need of your attention right now? Pick just one and start rebuilding your vitality today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.
Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, tell me if you've ever felt this way, like traditional religion just leaves some of life's absolute biggest questions totally unanswered. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating text that takes a hard, critical look at how traditional Western religion has evolved over the centuries, and it proposes a radical, modern reform. We'll be exploring the ideas presented in the book Edgar Cayce's Spiritual Messages, specifically focusing on its deep dive into the various problems of religion. So let's jump right in and unpack the past, present, and future of faith. To get a handle on all this, we'll follow a quick roadmap. First, the historical issues of Christianity. Second, the missing reincarnation concept. Third, supplementing those teachings via Edgar Cayce. Fourth, direct spirit world communication. And finally, moving towards modern religious reform. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, historical issues of Christianity, and specifically a loss of flexibility. The text poses a really interesting question right out of the gate. How exactly does a vibrant, original teaching lose its flexibility over 2 millennia? I mean, 2,000 years is a massive stretch of time. The source points out that original teachings don't always naturally evolve or expand. Instead, thanks to human interpretation and institutional preservation, they often just freeze. They become incredibly rigid and inflexible. And you can see that stark contrast right here. The author argues that as Christianity aged, the vibrant tolerance of its early days was completely replaced by rigid dogma. People became obsessed with simply not breaking the established rules. And tragically, history shows us that folks who tried to offer supplementary teachings, people just trying to adapt the faith for their time, were literally labeled heretics. Some were even burned at the stake. They were just trying to help the faith evolve, but the institution wouldn't allow it. Which brings us to Section 2, the missing reincarnation concept, explaining life's inequalities. So the source identifies karma and reincarnation as the ultimate missing pieces of traditional Western dogma. Think about it. Without these concepts, we're left scratching our heads wondering why life is so profoundly unfair. Why do terrible things happen to seemingly great people? Or why is one person born into extreme wealth and another into severe poverty? If you're only looking at one single lifetime, well, the math just doesn't add up. The text uses this classic, powerful metaphor: you must reap the seeds you have sown. It's karma in a nutshell. But here's the catch. You can't always see the sowing and the reaping play out in just one short human lifespan. Sometimes a person faces sudden illness or a business goes completely under despite them doing everything right, while others succeed with zero effort. The reality, according to the source, is that personal accountability, that fundamental law of cause and effect, actually extends backward and forward across multiple lifetimes. Moving right along to Section 3, supplementing teachings via Cayce, a spiritual intervention. So to address those missing truths, the text brings in Edgar Cayce. You can see the cover of our source material here. Cayce was one of the most renowned psychics in 20th century America. He would enter this self-induced hypnotic trance, and his subconscious mind, guided by higher spirits, would deliver these profound messages, or readings. The book argues these weren't just parlor tricks, not at all. This was a deliberate, direct spiritual intervention meant to correct the historical blind spots of traditional Western faith. This comparison really breaks it down beautifully. Cayce basically acted as a targeted bridge. Where Orthodox Christianity completely missed the mechanism of karma, Cayce stepped in to explain the spiritual cause and effect behind illnesses and life struggles. Where traditional dogma left out reincarnation, Cayce tracked individuals' past lives to solve their present-day miseries. And where traditional teachings kept the spirit world opaque and mysterious, Cayce's readings actively pulled back the curtain to reveal how the spiritual realm actually works. He supplied the exact puzzle pieces that were missing. That takes us to Section 4, direct spirit world communication, the modern era. According to the text, human religious history has been moving along this fascinating timeline. For like 2,000 years, we basically just relied on ancient texts. Then, kicking off in the late 19th century in places like the US and the UK, we saw the spiritualism movement, this fresh wave of spirit communication. And that sets the stage for today, which the author describes as an entirely new era of direct, active communication from higher spiritual realms. Just imagine that for a second. Getting a direct, real-time message from heaven. The core argument here is that true spiritual evolution today isn't about endlessly debating scriptures that were written thousands of years ago. It requires a direct connection right now. We're supposedly entering an era where the laws of heaven are delivered straight to humanity, which creates a living, breathing faith rather than something frozen in the past. And finally, Section 5, towards modern religious reform, a new approach. Because of this incredible new era of direct communication, the source issues a huge call to action. We need a complete religious reform to guide humanity forward, built on 3 pillars. First, we've got to definitively prove the existence of the spiritual world. Second, that proof can't just be mystical and vague anymore. It needs to be backed by scientific, analytical, and philosophical explanations so modern minds can actually grasp it. And third, this movement has to create the ultimate miracle. So, what exactly is that ultimate miracle? Well, it's not physical healing. I mean, sure, Edgar Cayce was famous for his medical readings, but the text emphasizes that the body is really just a vessel. The soul is what actually matters. So the absolute greatest miracle is fundamentally transforming human values. It's about waking people up, shifting our focus away from purely material stuff, and redirecting all that energy towards spiritual growth and how we genuinely treat one another. It's such a fascinating perspective on where faith is heading. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this really provocative thought from the source material. Seriously, ponder this for a second in your own life. If you received undeniable, direct proof of the spiritual world and the laws of karma today, how would it change your daily values?
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to impartially unpack a truly fascinating esoteric framework for diagnosing illness. We're looking directly at a text that details channeled spiritual messages attributed to Edgar Cayce. We're going to focus specifically on how this framework attempts to explain those severe, persistent ailments that just completely defy conventional medical understanding. If you enjoy mapping out unique systems of thought and exploring how different philosophies categorize the human experience, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's a profoundly relatable human struggle, right? Dealing with a physical illness that modern medicine simply cannot explain, let alone cure. I mean, when patients face a total dead end with traditional doctors, where do they turn? The source material we're examining today offers a highly novel, really metaphysical perspective on these exact medical mysteries. It actually suggests that the root of the problem might not be physical at all.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the root of unexplained illnesses. Then, animal spirits and symptoms. Third, we'll cover the danger of external healing. And finally, number 4, the path to true healing.
All right, starting with Section 1, Root of Unexplained Illnesses. We are looking specifically at Chapter 5 of the source text. It's titled, Personal Consultations by Edgar Cayce's Spirit. In this section, individuals present their chronic, unexplained physical and mental disorders to the channeled spirit, basically seeking an explanation that goes way beyond the physical body.
So the crucial point here is understanding this very specific term, spiritual disturbance, or ratio as it's called in Japanese. According to the text, when an illness or mental disorder is deemed incurable or totally inexplicable by standard medicine, it is very often diagnosed as ratio. This framework argues that these afflictions are actually caused by the karma of past lives, or, and this is key, by attachments from uncrossed over spirits. We're talking ancestors, miscarried children, or even animals who harbor grudges or really strong worldly attachments.
Moving right along to Section 2, Animal Spirits and Symptoms.
To see exactly how these spiritual disturbances manifest in real life, let's look at a specific consultation from the text. Here, a young woman is suffering from vitiligo, which is a condition where the skin loses its pigment. Now, instead of a biological explanation, the channeled spirit introduces the concept of an animal spirit attachment. It notes that skin conditions are actually frequently linked not to human spirits, but to animal spirits.
What's really fascinating here is the precise logic they use to connect the spiritual to the physical. The diagnosis for the young woman's vitiligo is an attachment from a dog spirit, specifically a dog that died suffering from a severe hair loss disease. Now, since humans obviously don't have the same kind of fur to lose, the text explains that the spiritual symptom translates into the physical human body as the loss of skin pigment, showing up as white patches. Wild, right? And the text offers another bizarre, but honestly internally consistent example: coastal skin conditions, sometimes referred to as fish scale disease. The framework explains that in coastal areas where massive amounts of fish die, their uncrossed over spirits can actually form a collective spirit. If this collective fish spirit attaches to a person, the physical symptom manifests as a scaly, fish-like texture on their skin.
And in a third example, there's a patient suffering from intense stiffness, joint pain, and just this unrelenting tightening of the lower back and shoulders. The diagnosis? An attachment of a white snake spirit. The text notes that reptilian spirits, which naturally coil and constrict, frequently cause localized physical tightness, heavy pressure, or joint pain in the human body they attach to. It kind of makes sense within the rules of this universe.
Now you might be wondering, why doesn't this happen to everyone? Well, the text is really clear on this. These disturbances specifically afflict individuals who possess a spiritually sensitive constitution, or ritaishitsu. It's basically a highly receptive, porous constitution that makes a person uniquely vulnerable to absorbing the invisible wavelengths or grudges of these wandering spirits.
All right, Section 3, the danger of external healing. We all know that when people are desperate for a cure, they'll try just about anything. But the source text actually delivers a really strict warning against relying solely on external psychic healers, shock therapies, or supernatural telekinetic treatments to try and cure these spiritual disturbances.
In fact, the text famously summarizes this reliance on external psychics with the phrase, "the blind leading the blind."
Impartially speaking, the framework's stance is that if a patient doesn't understand the spiritual root of their illness and a psychic healer simply uses force without genuine religious truth, well, neither party actually sees the real problem.
This brilliantly illustrates the internal logic of the source. Like, why exactly does it fail? The text argues that psychic manipulation relies purely on physical or telekinetic phenomena. Sure, it might forcefully rip an attached spirit away temporarily, but it completely ignores the true spiritual root, which is the dark wavelength, or the grudge itself. Because the patient hasn't actually changed their own internal state, the spirit simply returns, often way angrier, which actually causes the physical condition to worsen over time.
This brings us to Section 4, the path to true healing.
So, if external force doesn't work, what does? Well, this prescription completely flips the script. Instead of looking outward, it advocates for a profound internal shift, directly pushing back against that external reliance on healers.
The text outlines a precise, four-step empowering solution that demands active internal work from the individual. Step 1. Deeply reflect on any causes or wrongdoings that may have attracted this negative energy in the first place. Step 2. Reconcile with the attached spirit using love and peace rather than fighting it. Step 3. Actively study spiritual truth to elevate your mind. And Step 4. Shift your personal vibration toward the light.
Expanding on that final step, shifting one's wavelength is really presented as the ultimate cure here. The text instructs the afflicted to avoid dark atmospheres, firmly focus their mind in a positive, bright direction, and actively let light into their heart. Instead of treating the spirit as this enemy to be exorcised, the individual is told to pray for the spirit's peace and transition to the next world. By elevating your own mental wavelength to one of light and positivity, the connection with the dark attachment is naturally broken, which, according to the text, leads to true physical and mental healing. It's just an incredibly detailed and structured way to look at human suffering, shifting the ultimate responsibility and power for healing right back into the hands and mind of the individual. Which leaves us with a provocative final thought based on this framework. If your physical and mental well-being is truly a mirror of your internal wavelength, what kind of light are you letting in today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.